The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Mara Whitlock stepped down into the Wyoming dust, 8 months pregnant, alone, and about to be destroyed. She'd traveled 300 miles to answer a town's desperate call for a midwife, only to watch every door slam shut the moment they saw her swollen belly and bare ring finger. Within an hour, she stood on the main street with her bag at her feet and nowhere to go, while the same people who'd begged for help whispered behind their hands. Then a scarred man with cold eyes crossed the road toward her, and everything changed. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Mara's story travels, and if you want to know whether she survives what comes next, stay until the end and hit that like button. The August sun hammered down on Fletcher's Crossing like a smith's anvil, turning the dirt street into a ribbon of choking dust. Mara Whitlock gripped the stagecoach rail as the driver hauled her trunk down with a grunt, the leather bag containing everything she owned landing beside it with a thud that raised a small cloud. She pressed one hand to the small of her back where the ache had settled deep after 2 days of rattling over rutted roads, the other resting protectively on the swell of her belly. "This is it, ma'am," the driver said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Fletcher's Crossing. Stage doesn't come back through for another week." Mara nodded, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. A week. She'd be settled by then. She had to be. The letter had been clear: urgent need for midwife, housing and fair wage provided, territory growing, plenty of work. She looked down the main street, taking in the collection of false-fronted buildings that made up the town. A general store, a saloon with peeling paint, a church with a modest steeple, a smithy, its forge already glowing in the heat, and faces, dozens of them, appearing in windows and doorways, drawn by the arrival of the stage, drawn by her. Mara straightened her spine and lifted her chin, ignoring the way her travel-stained dress pulled tight across her middle. Let them look. She was a trained midwife, educated by the Sisters of Mercy in St. Louis, apprenticed to the best birth attendant in 3 counties. She'd delivered over 100 babies, saved mothers the town doctors had given up on, turned breech births and stopped hemorrhages that would have killed women in less skilled hands. She was exactly what they'd asked for. A woman emerged from the general store, middle-aged and sharp-eyed, her calico dress crisp despite the heat. 2 others followed, younger, their curious gazes sweeping over Mara from head to toe. The assessment took perhaps 3 seconds. The change in their expressions took less. "You're the midwife?" the first woman asked, her voice gone flat. "I am. Mara Whitlock. I received a letter from—" "We sent for a proper midwife." The word was a slap. "A respectable woman." Heat that had nothing to do with the sun flooded Mara's face. "I'm a trained professional. I have references, letters of recommendation." "You have a bastard in your belly and no husband on your arm." The woman's eyes were hard as flint. "We don't need your kind here." The words hit like fists. Mara's hand tightened on her bag, her knuckles going white. The letter said, "The letter was sent before we knew what sort of woman would answer it." A man had joined them now, thick-necked and prosperous-looking, his vest straining over a comfortable middle. "We're building a decent community here. Christian values. We can't have someone like you influencing our women, our daughters." "Someone like me?" Mara's voice shook, but she forced it steady. "A trained midwife who can save lives? I've done nothing wrong. I'm here to work, nothing more." "You've done plenty wrong, girl." An older woman had appeared, her face pinched with righteousness. "Or did that baby sprout in your belly by divine intervention? We know what you are. We don't need your sort bringing shame to decent folk." The circle was tightening now, more townspeople gathering, their faces a wall of judgment. Mara felt her throat closing, her breath coming shallow. This couldn't be happening. She'd traveled so far, spent the last of her money on the stage fare, burned every bridge in St. Louis to come to a place that had asked for her. "Please," she said, and hated the break in her voice. "I have nowhere else to go. The baby comes in a month. I just need work, a room. I'll stay out of sight. You'll get back on that stage when it returns," the prosperous man said, "or find your way to the next town. But you won't be staying here." Mara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let them see her cry. "The next town is 40 miles. I can't—" "Should have thought of that before you opened your legs for a man who wouldn't marry you." The crudeness of it struck her silent. She stood there in the blazing sun, surrounded by strangers who looked at her with contempt and disgust, and felt the last of her hope crumble into dust. She'd been so sure this would work. The letter had seemed like Providence itself, arriving just when she needed it most. A new start. A place where no one knew her history, where she could work and save and build a life for her child. She'd been a fool. The crowd was dispersing now, the show over. Mara stood alone on the street, her trunk at her feet, the sun beating down without mercy. She had $3 in her pocket. The stage wouldn't return for a week, and even if she could buy passage, she had nowhere to go. St. Louis was closed to her. Her family had made that brutally clear, and she was 8 months pregnant, tired to her bones, and utterly alone. She sank down onto her trunk, no longer caring what they thought. Let them see her defeated. They'd already decided what she was. The afternoon crawled past. The sun moved across the sky, and Mara sat in the diminishing shade of the stage office overhang, trying not to think about what came next. A few people passed, giving her wide berth as if shame were contagious. No one spoke to her. No one met her eyes. When the shadows began to lengthen, she finally stood, her back screaming in protest. She'd have to find somewhere to sleep. Maybe the livery would let her bed down in the hay for a few coins. Maybe. "You the midwife?" The voice came from behind her, low and rough as gravel. Mara turned. The man who'd spoken stood at the edge of the street, one boot up on the boardwalk, his posture deceptively casual. He was tall, rangier than the soft-bellied townsman, his shirt sleeves rolled back over forearms corded with lean muscle. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from stone, and a scar that ran from his left temple down past his ear, white against sun-darkened skin. But it was his eyes that caught her. Pale blue, cold as winter sky, and watching her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "I am," she said, lifting her chin despite the flutter of fear in her chest. "Or I was meant to be." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Up close she could see more scars. A thin line across his knuckles, another disappearing into his collar. His hands were work-hardened, his stance that of a man who expected trouble and knew how to handle it. "Heard what happened," he said. "Town gave you the righteous treatment. They made their position clear." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone so fast she might have imagined it. "They're good at that, righteous folk." The way he said it made the words sound like an insult. Mara waited, unsure what he wanted. The street was emptying as families headed home for supper, and the awareness of her vulnerability settled over her like a weight. She was alone with a stranger who looked like he'd seen the wrong end of plenty of fights and won them anyway. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. "That's my concern." "That's a no." He stepped fully onto the boardwalk, and she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. He was perhaps 30, though the weathering and scars made it hard to tell. "You know anything about running a household? Cooking for a crew?" Mara's heart kicked against her ribs. "I'm a midwife, not a housekeeper." "That an answer?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I can cook. I can manage a house. The sisters made sure we learned practical skills alongside the medical training." He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something. "I've got a cattle ranch 8 miles northwest. Lost my cook 2 months back, and the crew's about ready to mutiny over the food. House is a disaster. Need someone who can keep things running." "You want to hire me?" The words came out flat with disbelief. "For the work. Nothing else." His eyes were steady, unflinching. "You'd have your own room, away from the bunkhouse. Fair wage, paid monthly. You cook, clean, keep the house in order. Winter's coming. You'd be inside and fed." It was too good, too easy. Mara's hands curled into fists. "Why?" "You can see what I am. What they said. I can see you're pregnant and alone." His voice was matter-of-fact. "I can also see you're educated, which means you're not stupid. And I need someone who can turn out decent meals without poisoning my crew. That's the trade. You want it or not. You don't know anything about me. I know you traveled 300 miles to answer a call for help, and you're still standing after what this town just did to you. That's enough." He paused, his gaze flickering to her belly, then back to her face. "Baby comes in how long?" "A month? Maybe less." "You know how to deliver it yourself if you need to?" The question was so blunt it startled a short laugh out of her. I'm a midwife. I've delivered babies in worse conditions than you can imagine. Then you'll manage. He held out his hand. Ronan Vale, Stone Vale Ranch. Mara stared at his outstretched hand. It was scarred across the knuckles, the fingers long and calloused. A working man's hand. She thought of the $3 in her pocket, the week until the stage returned, the hostile town, and the long winter ahead. She thought of her baby, and what would happen if she had no shelter when the time came. She took his hand. His grip was firm, brief, and he released her almost immediately. "Wagon's at the livery," he said. "I'll load your trunk. We leave in 10 minutes. He turned and strode away before she could respond, moving with the easy confidence of a man who expected to be obeyed. Mara stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling. Then she grabbed her medical bag and followed. The livery was dim and cool after the street, smelling of hay and horses and leather. Ronan was already hefting her trunk into the back of a weathered wagon, handling the weight as if it were nothing. 2 horses stood hitched and patient, their hides gleaming with good care. "Mr. Vale," Mara started. "Ronan." He didn't look up from securing the trunk. "Ronan, then. I need to understand the terms. You said fair wage. What does that mean? $30 a month, room and board included." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "Standard rate for a ranch cook. You do the work, you get paid. Simple as that." $30. It was more than she'd made in St. Louis, more than most women could command. "And when the baby comes?" "You'll need time to recover. We'll manage." His expression didn't change. "Anything else?" "Yes. 100 things. Why was he doing this? What did he expect from her? What kind of man offered work to a woman the whole town had just rejected?" But his face was closed, his manner making it clear the conversation was finished. "No," she said finally. "Nothing else." "Then let's go. It's 2 hours to the ranch and I'd rather not make it in the dark." He helped her up onto the wagon seat with impersonal efficiency, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a soft click of his tongue, the horses moved forward, and Mara watched Fletcher's crossing fall away behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour. The land rolled out in all directions, endless and wild, the grass gold in the late afternoon sun. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still showing snow. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals, and the only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, and the whisper of wind through the grass. Mara's hands rested on her belly, feeling the baby shift and settle. She was leaving civilization for the isolation of a cattle ranch, placing herself in the hands of a scarred stranger who looked like he'd done violence and would do it again if necessary. It was reckless, possibly insane. It was also the only choice she had. "Why did you do it?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ronan didn't look at her, his eyes on the road ahead. "Do what?" "Offer me work. You must know what it will cost you. The town already hates you. I saw how they looked at you. Taking me in will make it worse." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "The town's opinion is worth less than spit to me." "Even so, you needed help." He said it flatly, as if that explained everything. "I needed a cook. It's a practical arrangement, nothing more." But there was something in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he didn't quite meet her eyes, that told her there was more to it than practicality. She studied his profile, the hard line of his mouth, the scar that marked him as different, dangerous. "They'll make trouble for you," she said softly. "They already do." Now he did glance at her, and something cold and fierce flickered in his eyes. "Don't concern yourself with what the town thinks, Mara. They're not who you answer to. I am. And I don't give a damn about your past or your baby or what the righteous folk of Fletcher's Crossing have to say about either. You do the work, you've got a place. That's the only thing that matters." The words settled something in her chest. Not trust. She'd lost the ability to trust easily, but a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could survive long enough to figure out what came next. The sun was touching the horizon when the ranch came into view. Stone Vale, he'd called it, and she could see why. The house was built of local stone, solid and low to the ground, designed to withstand the brutal winter winds. Outbuildings clustered around it, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals and pens. Cattle dotted the slopes beyond, dark shapes against the gold grass. It looked permanent, rooted, real. Ronan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. I'll get your trunk. You go on inside. Mara climbed down carefully, her back protesting. The front door was heavy oak, scarred with weather and time. She pushed it open and stepped into a large main room that made her breath catch. It was chaos. Dirty dishes were piled on every surface. Clothes and gear lay scattered across furniture. The floor was gritty with tracked-in dirt, and the stone fireplace was choked with old ash. The whole place smelled of stale food and unwashed men. She heard Ronan come in behind her, setting her trunk down with a thud. It's been a rough couple of months, he said, and there might have been a trace of embarrassment in his voice. Mara turned slowly, taking it all in. A rough couple of months was an understatement. This was the accumulation of weeks, maybe longer, of men living without any domestic order whatsoever. "Where's my room?" she asked. He led her through the chaos to a door off the main room. The space beyond was smaller, simpler, but blessedly clean. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's not much," Ronan said. "It's perfect." And it was. It was private, safe, hers. After months of uncertainty, of begging for scraps of charity, and sleeping in mission dormitories, having a room with a door she could close felt like luxury. Ronan nodded and moved to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Crew comes in for supper in an hour. There's supplies in the kitchen, such as it is. You feel up to cooking tonight, or should I tell them to fend for themselves one more day?" Mara looked past him to the disaster of the main room, then down at her travel-stained dress and dusty boots. Every muscle in her body ached. The baby was pressing on her bladder, her back was screaming, and she wanted nothing more than to lie down and close her eyes. But she'd made a deal. And if there was one thing the sisters had taught her, it was that you earned your keep through work, not wishes. "I'll cook," she said. "But tomorrow this house gets cleaned properly. All of it." Something shifted in Ronan's expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. "Fair enough. I'll tell the men." He started to turn away, then stopped again. "Mara?" "Yes?" "Welcome to Stone Vale." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the floor, the door closing behind him. Mara stood alone in her small room, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. Men's voices in the distance, horses whickering, the wind against the walls. She pressed both hands to her belly, feeling her daughter move beneath her palms. "Well," she whispered, "here we are. Let's see if we can make this work." Then she rolled up her sleeves and went to face the kitchen. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. The kitchen was only marginally better than the main room. Pots crusted with burned food, a stove that needed cleaning, supplies shoved into corners without any organization. But there were basics: flour, salt, beans, a smokehouse out back with decent bacon, potatoes in a root cellar, eggs from a few scraggly chickens. Mara worked fast, her hands remembering skills learned in the mission kitchens. She started bean soaking, got the stove going, sliced bacon thick and set it to frying, found onions and chopped them fine, mixed up biscuit dough, and got it in the oven. It wasn't fancy, but it would be hot and filling and better than whatever the men had been eating. The sun was setting when she heard boots on the porch. Male voices, rough and tired. The door opened and men filed in, 5 of them, ranging from a kid who couldn't be more than 17 to a grizzled man in his 50s. They stopped short when they saw her, surprise and wariness flickering across their faces. Ronan came in last, his eyes moving from Mara to the stove, where the bacon was sizzling and the biscuits were starting to smell like heaven. "This is Mara Whitlock," he said, his voice carrying easy authority. "She's the new cook and housekeeper. You treat her with respect, you keep the mud outside, and you don't make more work for her than necessary. Understood?" There was a chorus of, "Yes, boss," and "Sure thing, Ronan," but the men's eyes kept drifting to Mara's belly, their expressions carefully neutral. "Wash up," Ronan said. "Food's almost ready." They moved to obey, and Mara turned back to the stove, hyper-aware of being watched, judged. She plated up the food, beans and bacon, biscuits with butter, coffee so strong it could strip paint. Simple, hearty ranch food. The men ate in silence at first, too hungry or too uncertain to talk. Then the youngest one, the kid with sun-bleached hair and a gap-toothed grin, looked up from his plate. "Ma'am, these are the best biscuits I've had since I left home." "Tommy's right," the older man agreed. This is real food. Appreciate it, ma'am. Mara felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. You're welcome. There's more if you want it. They wanted it. They cleaned out the pot of beans, ate every biscuit, and went back for seconds on the coffee. And slowly, as the meal went on, they began to talk about the day's work, about cattle that needed moving, about a fence that needed mending. Ranch talk, the easy conversation of men who work together. Ronan sat at the head of the table, eating steadily, saying little, but his eyes tracked the room, noting how the men relaxed, how the tension eased. When they were finished, he stood. Tommy, Marcus, you're on dishes tonight. The rest of you can head to the bunkhouse. We've got early start tomorrow. The men filed out, and the two designated for cleanup approached the kitchen with visible reluctance. Mara almost smiled. I'll help, she said. Faster with 3. They worked together in companionable silence, and when the last pot was scrubbed and put away, Mara found herself alone in the quiet house. Ronan had disappeared somewhere, out to check the stock, she guessed. The fire in the main room had burned down to embers. She made her way to her small room and sank onto the bed with a sigh that came from her bones. Every part of her hurt. The baby was kicking up a storm, as if she too was adjusting to this new place. Through the wall she could hear the faint sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Men's laughter from the bunkhouse, a horse stamping in the barn. The wind picking up, carrying the smell of sage and distant rain. Mara lay back and closed her eyes, her hand resting on her belly. She'd survived the first day. Tomorrow she'd tackle the house, establish order, prove her worth. She'd make this work because she had to, because her daughter deserved better than a mother who gave up when things got hard. And maybe, just maybe, in this wild, hard place, she'd find something she'd lost back in St. Louis. A future. Mara woke to the sound of boots on the porch and the gray light of dawn filtering through her window. For a moment she lay disoriented, her hand moving instinctively to her belly, then memory flooded back. The hostile town, the scarred rancher, the chaos she'd promised to transform. She pushed herself upright with a grunt, her back protesting, and reached for the dress she'd hung on the bedpost the night before. The main room was empty when she emerged, but evidence of the crew's early departure littered the space. Muddy boot prints, a forgotten hat, the lingering smell of coffee someone had made badly. Through the window she could see figures moving in the distance, heading toward the cattle pens. Working men, up before the sun, doing what needed doing. She could do the same. Mara tied an apron over her dress and surveyed the disaster with the calculating eye of someone who'd managed hospital wards and mission kitchens. The work would take days, but she'd start with the worst of it, the kitchen, where grime and disorder made everything harder. She heated water, found rags and lye soap, and began scrubbing with the steady rhythm of someone who'd learned long ago that physical work could quiet an anxious mind. By mid-morning, sweat was running down her back and her hands were raw, but the kitchen was starting to look like a room where food could be safely prepared. She'd scoured the stove, organized the pantry, scrubbed every pot and pan until they gleamed. The baby was pressing hard on her bladder, forcing her to stop frequently, but she refused to slow down. She'd made a promise, and she'd keep it. She was on her knees scrubbing the floor when she heard the door open behind her. You trying to kill yourself on the first day? Mara looked up to find Ronan standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. Dust clung to his clothes, and there was a fresh scrape on his knuckles. I'm working, she said, sitting back on her heels. Like you hired me to do. I hired you to cook and manage the house, not destroy your back before the baby comes. He moved closer, his eyes taking in the transformed kitchen, the buckets of dirty water, her flushed face. You need to rest. I need to earn my keep. Something flickered across his face. Frustration, maybe, or concern. You earned it last night when you fed the crew the first decent meal they've had in weeks. Nobody expects you to work yourself into an early labor. I expect it of myself. Mara pushed herself to her feet, one hand bracing against the small of her back. I don't take charity, Ronan. I work for what I'm given. He studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough, but you pace yourself. I need you healthy when that baby comes, not collapsed from exhaustion. It was perhaps the most practical expression of concern she'd ever received, and something about that made her throat tight. She swallowed hard. I'll be careful. See that you are. He turned to leave, then paused. "The crew speaks highly of your cooking. They wanted me to tell you." "They told me themselves at breakfast." "They were being polite. What they actually said was that if you decided to leave, they'd mutiny." The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "So I suppose you're stuck with us now." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the floorboards, leaving Mara standing in her clean kitchen with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. The days fell into a pattern. Mara rose before dawn to start breakfast, biscuits and gravy, bacon and eggs, pancakes thick with molasses. The crew ate like starving wolves and thanked her with the awkward sincerity of men unused to female company. She learned their names and their quirks. Tommy, the youngest, who always took seconds. Marcus, grizzled and quiet, who'd been with Ronan the longest. Jack and Sam, brothers who bickered constantly but worked together like a well-oiled machine. And Wyatt, middle-aged and steady, who'd lost his wife to fever 2 winters back and still wore his wedding ring. After they left for the day's work, Mara tackled the house. She cleaned methodically, room by room, bringing order to chaos. She scrubbed floors and walls, beat the dust from rugs, washed windows until they gleamed. She found Ronan's bedroom, as spare and austere as a monk's cell, with nothing personal except a rifle hung above the bed and a book on animal husbandry on the nightstand, and left it mostly alone, just changing the sheets and sweeping the floor. In the afternoons, when the baby's weight and her own exhaustion forced her to stop, she worked on smaller tasks. She found fabric in a trunk and began mending the crew's clothes, which were held together more by hope than thread. She organized the supplies that came in from town, delivered by a surly man who wouldn't meet her eyes and left the boxes on the porch without a word. She started an herb garden in a sheltered spot near the kitchen door, transplanting wild sage and yarrow she found growing on the ranch, adding seeds she'd brought from St. Louis, tucked in her medical bag. The work was endless, exhausting, and strangely soothing. Here, her worth was measured in tangible results: clean floors, good food, mended shirts. No one questioned her morals or her choices. No one whispered behind her back. The crew treated her with careful respect, and Ronan watched over everything with a quiet vigilance that made her feel safer than she'd felt in months. It was on the 4th day that Marcus approached her as she was hanging laundry, the wind whipping the sheets like sails. "Ma'am, got a question for you." Mara turned, shading her eyes against the sun. "What is it?" The older man shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "My shoulder's been giving me trouble. Old injury, acts up when the weather changes. Wife used to make a poultice that helped, but she's been gone 3 years now, and I can't recall what she put in it." "Let me see." Mara dried her hands on her apron and had him show her the shoulder. The joint was inflamed, the muscle around it tight and knotted. "Comfrey root and arnica, if I had them, but I can make do with what's here. Come by the kitchen after supper." His relief was palpable. "Appreciate it, ma'am. Been hurting something fierce." That evening she made the poultice from herbs she'd dried, mixing them with hot water and wrapping the compress in clean cloth. Marcus sat at the kitchen table while she applied it, his weathered face relaxing as the heat and herbs did their work. "That's better already," he said. "You've got the touch." "I'm a midwife. Healing's part of the trade." "Ronan said you delivered babies back east. Must have been hard work." "Harder than this?" Mara smiled slightly, wrapping the compress more securely. "Every birth is hard, but bringing a life into the world, helping a mother through that moment, there's nothing else like it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "You planning to deliver your own when the time comes?" The question she'd been avoiding. Mara's hand stilled on the bandage. "I don't have much choice. The town's made it clear I'm not welcome, and I doubt they'd send their doctor even if I begged." "Ronan won't let you go through it alone." She looked up sharply. "Ronan has cattle to manage and a ranch to run. He won't let you go through it alone," Marcus repeated, his eyes steady on hers. "Boss looks after his own, and whether you've been here 4 days or 4 years, you're his now. He'll see you through it." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own as she always had, but the truth was she was terrified of what would happen when her time came. Terrified of something going wrong with no one to help, of her daughter paying the price for her mother's pride and stubbornness. "Keep the compress on for an hour," she said instead, her voice rougher than she intended. Come back tomorrow if it's still bothering you." That night, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Mara sat at the kitchen table with her medical bag open in front of her. She inventoried her supplies: scissors, thread for stitching, clean cloth for bandages, a few precious bottles of tincture. It would be enough if everything went smoothly. And if it didn't, "Can't sleep?" She jumped, her hand going to her throat. Ronan stood in the doorway to his room, his shirt hanging open, his hair loose around his shoulders. The lamplight caught the network of scars across his chest and arms. Old wounds, layered over each other like a map of violence, survived. "I'm just checking supplies," she said. He moved into the room with that cat-quiet grace she'd noticed, despite his size. "For the baby." It wasn't a question. Mara nodded, her hands moving restlessly over the instruments. "I like to be prepared." "You worried about it?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Most people, especially men, avoided the subject of childbirth as if it were indecent. But Ronan just watched her steadily, waiting for an honest answer. "Every birth carries risk," she said carefully. "I've seen things go wrong too many times to be complacent. And doing this alone, you won't be alone. Ronan, you can't. I've pulled calves, foals, helped birth just about every animal on this ranch." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his eyes holding hers. "A baby can't be that different." Despite herself, Mara laughed, a short, surprised sound. "It's considerably different. But the principle's the same. Something needs to come out, you help it along, you don't panic when things get messy." He leaned back, his expression serious now. "I'm not saying I'm a midwife. I'm saying you won't be alone when your time comes. Whatever you need, I'll be there." The simple certainty in his voice made her eyes burn. She blinked hard, looking down at her hands. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" Silence. Then, "Maybe I know what it's like to be cast out, to have nowhere to go and no one who gives a damn whether you live or die." She looked up. His face was shadowed, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the old pain in his eyes. "What happened to you?" "Nothing that matters now." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Point is, you're not facing this alone, so stop worrying yourself sick and get some rest. You'll need your strength." He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into his room and closing the door with quiet finality. Mara sat in the lamplight, her hand resting on her belly, feeling her daughter's restless movements beneath her palm. "He'll see you through it," Marcus had said. And Ronan had just promised the same thing, in his blunt, matter-of-fact way. She'd spent so long fending for herself, trusting no one, that the idea of relying on someone else felt dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, she could let her guard down enough to accept help when it came. The next week brought the first real test. Tommy came in from the range with his hand wrapped in a blood-soaked handkerchief, his young face pale beneath the dirt and sunburn. Mara took one look and moved into the efficient calm she'd learned in the hospital wards. "Sit. Let me see it." The cut was deep, running across his palm where barbed wire had caught him. It needed stitches, and soon, before infection set in. She sent Wyatt for clean water and her medical bag, then focused on the boy. "This is going to hurt," she said, meeting his eyes. "But if I don't stitch it now, you could lose the use of your hand. Can you stay still?" Tommy nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes, ma'am." She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth, then stitching with small, precise movements while he gripped the table edge with his other hand and breathed hard through his nose. The other men had gathered, watching silently, and when she tied off the last stitch and bandaged his hand, Marcus let out a low whistle. "Clean work. Doc in town couldn't have done better." "Doc in town charges $5 for that," Jack added, and his stitches looked like a drunk spider made them. Mara allowed herself a small smile as she cleaned her instruments. "Keep it dry and clean, Tommy. Come see me every day so I can check for infection. And for heaven's sake, be more careful around that wire." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." The boy looked at her with something approaching awe, and she had to turn away before the emotion showed on her face. That evening, as she was starting supper, Ronan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching her work, and she felt his presence like heat from a fire. "Heard you patched up Tommy." It was a simple procedure. Nothing simple when you're stitching a man's hand back together. He moved closer, and she could smell leather and sage and the clean sweat of hard work. The crew's impressed. They're easy to impress. She kept her eyes on the onions she was chopping, hyper-aware of how close he stood. They're not. They're good men who have seen enough of the world to recognize skill when they see it. He paused. You could have been a doctor. The statement startled her into looking up. Women can't be doctors, not real ones. You've got the hands for it, the mind. The training's just pieces of paper saying you're allowed to do what you already know how to do. It was perhaps the most radical thing anyone had ever said to her. Mara stared at him, this scarred, hard man who looked like he'd never had a gentle thought in his life, and felt something shift in her chest. The world doesn't work that way, she said softly. The world's wrong about a lot of things. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. Don't let it make you smaller than you are. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her heart pounding and tears she didn't understand burning in her eyes. The days grew shorter as August bled into September. The air turned crisp at night, and the aspens on the high slopes began their slow transformation to gold. Mara's belly grew heavier, the baby pressing down until walking was an effort, and sleep came in fitful bursts. But the house had been transformed, every room clean and organized, the crew's clothes mended, meals that made grown men sigh with satisfaction. She'd found her rhythm here, her purpose, and slowly, carefully, she'd begun to hope that maybe she could stay beyond the birth, could make a life here in this hard, beautiful place. Then the first snow came early, a freak September storm that howled down from the mountains and buried the ranch under a foot of white. The crew worked frantically to get the cattle to lower ground, to secure the outbuildings, to lay in enough wood to keep the fires burning. Mara made endless pots of coffee and stew, keeping the stove hot and the house warm while the wind screamed outside. It was on the second day of the storm that the pains started. She was kneading bread dough when the first contraction hit, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp and grip the table edge. It passed after a moment, and she tried to tell herself it was nothing. She'd had false labor before, practiced contractions that meant nothing. But an hour later, another came, stronger this time, and she knew with the certainty of her training that this was real. The baby was coming. A month early, in the middle of a blizzard, with no doctor and no help except a rancher who'd never delivered anything human in his life. She made it to her room and closed the door, breathing through the contractions, trying to time them. 20 minutes apart. 15. 10. They were coming faster than they should, harder than they should, and when her water broke in a warm rush, she felt the first real edge of fear. Something was wrong. She examined herself as best she could, her medical training warring with the pain and terror. The baby was positioned wrong, not head down as it should be, but sideways, maybe breech. The kind of presentation that killed mothers and babies both, that required skilled hands and time and luck, the kind that she couldn't manage alone. The door opened and Ronan stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, his eyes taking in her white face and the way she gripped the bedpost. "It started," she managed through gritted teeth. "I know. Marcus saw you from the window." He closed the door and moved to her side with that steady, unshakable calm. "Tell me what you need." "The baby's breech," her voice cracked. "I can feel it. If I can't turn it, Ronan, if I can't turn it, we're both going to die." His hand closed over hers on the bedpost, warm and solid. "Then we'll turn it. Tell me how." And in that moment, with the storm raging outside and death reaching for her with cold fingers, Mara made a choice. She looked into Ronan's pale eyes and saw no fear, no hesitation, just absolute determination. She took a shuddering breath and let herself trust. "All right," she whispered. "All right. Help me onto the bed. I'll walk you through it." What followed was hours of pain and terror and work. Ronan followed her instructions exactly, his hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her try to turn the baby from outside, as he supported her through contractions that felt like they would tear her apart. He didn't flinch from the blood or the mess, didn't leave her side even when she screamed. And when it became clear that the baby wouldn't turn, when the only option left was for Mara to deliver breech and hope they both survived it, he was there, steady and calm and utterly focused. "You can do this," he said, his voice cutting through the pain. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You can do this." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity. She'd never felt weaker, more helpless, more terrified. But his certainty wrapped around her like armor, and she found herself believing him. The final stage was a blur of agony and effort, and Ronan's voice guiding her through it, his hands catching the baby as she emerged feet first, tiny and blue and terrifyingly still. "She's not breathing," Mara gasped. "Ronan, she's not." But he was already moving, clearing the baby's mouth and nose with quick, efficient movements, rubbing her tiny chest until, finally, mercifully, a thin wail split the air. Mara sobbed with relief as he placed the baby on her chest, her daughter's skin warming against hers, her cries growing stronger. Ronan cleaned them both with gentle hands, delivered the afterbirth, checked Mara for tearing with the impersonal efficiency of a born rancher. "You're all right," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're both all right." Mara looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and alive, then up at Ronan, who'd just saved both their lives. His face was pale beneath the weathering, his hands trembling slightly now that the crisis had passed. There was blood on his shirt and exhaustion in his eyes, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing it wasn't enough, could never be enough. "Ronan, He shook his head, silencing her. "Rest now. You need your strength." He started to stand, but she caught his hand. "Stay, please. Just for a moment." He hesitated, then lowered himself carefully onto the edge of the bed. Mara's daughter had quieted, rooting against her chest, and the room was suddenly, profoundly still. "What will you name her?" Ronan asked softly. Mara looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair plastered to her head, the small hands curled into fists. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace." And as she said it, holding her daughter close while Ronan sat watch beside them, and the storm raged itself out beyond the walls, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt like she'd finally come home. The storm broke the next morning, leaving the world blanketed in white and glittering under a hard blue sky. Mara woke to the sound of Grace fussing beside her in the makeshift cradle Ronan had fashioned from a drawer and soft blankets. Every muscle in her body ached, and the effort of sitting up made her gasp. But when she lifted her daughter and felt the warm weight of her, the tiny mouth rooting hungrily, everything else faded to background noise. The door opened quietly and Ronan appeared carrying a tray, weak tea, broth, bread torn into soft pieces. He set it on the bedside table without meeting her eyes, his movements careful as if she might shatter. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I've been trampled by your entire herd." Mara managed a weak smile. "But alive. We're both alive, thanks to you." He shook his head sharply. "You did the hard part. I just followed orders." "You saved us." Her voice was firm despite its weakness. "Don't diminish what you did, Ronan. Most men would have panicked, run for help that wouldn't come in time. You stayed. You kept your head. You brought my daughter into this world with your own hands." Something shifted in his expression, pain, maybe, or longing. He looked down at Grace, nursing contentedly, and when he spoke his voice was rough. "She's beautiful, strong, like her mother. She wouldn't be here without you." Mara reached out and caught his hand before he could retreat. His fingers were warm, calloused, steady. "I need you to understand what that means. You gave me back my future. Everything I thought I'd lost when the town turned me away, you gave it all back." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on their joined hands. Then, carefully, "The crew wants to see her. Meet her proper. But only when you're ready." "Tomorrow," Mara decided. "Today I need to rest and let my body heal. Tomorrow I'll be strong enough to face admirers." He nodded and gently extracted his hand. "I'll let them know. And Mara, if you need anything, day or night, you call for me, understood?" "Understood." But after he left, Mara lay back against the pillows with Grace sleeping on her chest and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Somewhere between the first meal she'd cooked and the moment he'd placed her newborn daughter in her arms, she'd stopped seeing Ronan Vale as just an employer, a convenient refuge. She'd started seeing him as something far more dangerous. She'd started seeing him as home. The next few weeks passed in the exhausted blur of new motherhood. Grace proved to be a demanding baby, colicky and wakeful, only settling when Mara walked her through the house in endless circles, or when, to her surprise, Ronan took her and let the tiny girl sleep against his chest while he read his ranching journals by the fire. The crew was besotted, taking turns holding her with the careful reverence of men unused to anything so fragile, and Tommy appointed himself her honorary guardian, threatening violence against anyone who disturbed her sleep. But beyond the ranch, the world was less kind. The supplies that came from town grew more irregular, and when they did arrive, they were often wrong or incomplete, crucial items missing, spoiled goods included. The delivery man's hostility had sharpened into something uglier, and twice Mara saw him spit deliberately near the porch before leaving. "Town's talking," Marcus said one evening as he helped Mara carry in firewood. "About you staying here, about the baby." Mara's arms tightened around the logs. "Let them talk." "It's more than talk now. There's a man, Richard Ashford, owns the bank and half the businesses in Fletcher's Crossing. He's been making noise about moral standards, about how the ranch is harboring sin." Marcus's weathered face was grim. "He's got influence, and he's got friends." "What kind of friends?" "The kind who think a woman like you shouldn't be allowed to corrupt decent folk. The kind who might decide to do something about it." Fear curled cold in Mara's stomach, but she forced her voice steady. "Ronan needs to know." "Ronan already knows. Why do you think he's been riding the property lines every day? He's watching for trouble." That night, after Grace finally settled into restless sleep, Mara found Ronan on the porch, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the lamplight. "Marcus told me about Ashford," she said. "Marcus talks too much." But there was no heat in it. "Is it true? Are they planning something?" Ronan was quiet for a moment, his profile sharp against the night. "Ashford's been trying to buy this ranch for 2 years. I won't sell, so he's looking for leverage. You and Grace, you're convenient weapons." The casual way he said it made her anger flare. "Then send us away. Find us passage to the next territory. I won't let my presence destroy what you've built here." He turned to look at her then, his eyes catching the lamplight. "You think I'd let you go that easy?" "I think you're a practical man who knows when to cut his losses. You're not a loss." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. The crew's happy, the house runs smooth, and for the first time since I built this place, it feels like more than just a place to sleep between work. I'm not giving that up because some small-minded banker thinks he can dictate who I shelter under my own roof." Mara's throat tightened. "Ronan, they want a fight. They'll get one. But you're staying, you and Grace both." He stood abruptly, the rifle easy in his hands. "Go back inside. Get some rest. I'll watch tonight." She wanted to argue, to make him see reason, but the set of his shoulders told her it would be pointless. So she went, pausing in the doorway to look back at him. This hard, scarred man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "Nothing to thank me for. Just protecting what's mine." The words should have offended her. Instead, they wrapped around her heart like a promise. The crisis came 10 days later. Mara was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Riders coming fast, too many to be the supply wagon. She dropped the wet sheet and ran for the house, her heart hammering, Grace clutched against her chest. Ronan was in the barn. She could see him emerge at the sound of hoofbeats, the crew gathering behind him. 8 men rode into the yard, and leading them was a man Mara recognized from town, prosperous and well-fed, his coat expensive, his horse better. Richard Ashford. "Vale," he called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." "So talk." Ronan's voice was level, but Mara could see the tension in his shoulders. "This ranch sits on prime grazing land, water rights, access to the rail line when it comes through. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer, better than fair, enough to set you up somewhere else, start fresh." "Not interested." Ashford's smile was thin. "I think you'll reconsider when you hear the alternative. See, there's been complaints about your operation here, about the kind of people you're employing." His eyes cut to Mara standing in the doorway with Grace. "About the moral character of this establishment." "Get to the point," Ronan said. "The point is that the town council is concerned, very concerned, about a known prostitute living in sin on your ranch, raising a bastard child in full view of decent Christian families. The words were designed to wound, and they did. Mara flinched, her arms tightening around Grace. We can't have that kind of corruption spreading. So here's what's going to happen. You sell me this ranch at a fair price, or we'll make sure every supplier, every buyer, every business in 3 territories knows what kind of operation you're running. You'll be blacklisted. Finished. The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Ronan stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, but Mara could see the white of his knuckles where he gripped his rifle. And if I refuse, then we'll find other ways to encourage you. Fire's a terrible thing on a ranch. Accidents happen. And that woman, he gestured toward Mara with casual contempt. She's got no legal right to that baby. The father could show up, claim his property. We'd have to support his claim, of course. Law and all. Ice flooded Mara's veins. What father? He abandoned us. He has no rights. That's not what he says. Ashford's smile was cruel now. Fellow came through town last week, looking for his wayward wife. Said she ran off with his unborn child, stole money from him. Real sad story. We assured him we'd help him get his property back. The world tilted. Mara's former husband, here in Wyoming, looking for her, looking for Grace, the man who'd thrown her out when she told him she was pregnant, who'd called her a whore and said the child couldn't possibly be his. He'd found her and he wanted the baby he'd rejected. No. He wanted leverage, money, something he could use. There's no proof he's the father, she said, her voice shaking. No legal marriage. Nothing. There's a marriage certificate, and witnesses who'll swear you ran off in the night with his savings. Ashford's expression was smug. Like I said, law and all. So here's my final offer, Vale. Sell the ranch, send the woman packing, and we'll forget all this unpleasantness. Or refuse and watch everything you built burn, literally or legally, your choice. Ronan was quiet for so long Mara thought he might actually be considering it. Then he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of Ashford's horse. Get off my land, he said softly. And tell whoever put you up to this that Stonevale Ranch isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. And if you come back here threatening what's mine, I'll put a bullet through you before you clear the property line. Ashford's face darkened. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was listening to you this long. Now get out. For a moment, Mara thought Ashford might push it. His hand drifted toward his coat, and she saw Ronan's fingers tighten on the rifle. But then, one of the other riders, older, with the look of someone who'd seen violence and knew its cost, put a hand on Ashford's arm. Let's go, Richard. We've said our piece. Ashford jerked his horse's head around, his eyes promising retribution. You'll regret this, Vale. Both of you. They rode out in a cloud of dust, and the moment they were gone, Mara's legs gave out. She sank down on the porch steps, Grace crying now in response to her mother's distress, and tried to breathe through the panic crushing her chest. Ronan was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. It's all right. They're gone. They'll be back. And they'll bring the law, and my husband, and they'll take Grace. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Ronan, I can't lose her. I can't. She's everything. You won't lose her. His voice was absolute. I won't let that happen. How? How can you stop them? If he has a marriage certificate, if there are witnesses, then we'll get our own. Ronan's eyes were fierce, certain. Marry me, Mara. Right now, tonight. We'll make it legal, make you my wife. And Grace, I'll adopt her, claim her as mine. Let him try to take her then. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying. Mara stared at him, this man who'd saved her life, who'd delivered her daughter, who'd just threatened to kill to protect her, who was offering her marriage not out of love, but out of defiance, a legal shield against the wolves at the door. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I won't trap you into... This isn't about obligation. He cupped her face in his scarred hands, his touch infinitely gentle. I'm asking because I want to. Because somewhere between the day you stepped off that stage and right now, you became mine in every way that matters. And if making it legal is what keeps you and Grace safe, then that's what we'll do. But marriage, Ronan, it's permanent, binding. You can't. I know what marriage is. His thumb brushed away her tears. And I'm not asking out of pity or duty. I'm asking because I want you here, both of you, as my family, real and legal and permanent. He paused. his voice dropping to something rough and raw. "I'm asking because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, and I'd rather die than watch them take you away." The confession stole her breath. Mara searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation, and found only truth staring back at her. He loved her. This hard, scarred, impossible man loved her, and she loved him back. "Yes," she said, the word breaking free like a prayer. "Yes, I'll marry you. Tonight. Right now. Whenever you want." His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. "Tonight, then. I'll send Tommy for the circuit preacher. He's over in Blackwater, 2 hours' ride. We'll be married before midnight. Ashford will hear about it. He'll know what we're doing." "Good. Let him know. Let him understand that you're protected now, that Grace is mine, that anyone who comes for either of you goes through me first." Ronan stood and pulled her gently to her feet. Grace nestled between them. "Go get ready. Wear something pretty if you've got it. This might be practical, but it's still your wedding day." He kissed her forehead, quick and fierce, then strode off shouting orders to the crew. Mara stood on the porch in the gathering twilight, holding her daughter, and felt something wild and hopeful unfurl in her chest. She was getting married, to Ronan Vale, the man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing until now, when he'd asked for forever. The next few hours were chaos. The crew scrambled to prepare. Marcus rode out to tell the neighboring ranches. Jack and Sam cleaned the main room until it gleamed. Tommy raced off to fetch the preacher. Wyatt presented Mara with the length of cream-colored silk he'd been saving, his dead wife's wedding dress that he'd kept all these years. When Mara protested it was too precious, he pressed it into her hands with tears in his weathered eyes. "She'd want you to have it, want you to be happy, please." So Mara remade the dress while Grace slept, her fingers flying over the fabric, taking in the waist and hemming the length. It fit as if it had been made for her, simple and elegant, with long sleeves and a high neck that made her look like something other than what the town thought she was. She looked like a bride. The preacher arrived as the sun was setting, a thin man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Ronan explained the urgency. He simply opened his Bible and waited while the household assembled. The crew in their cleanest shirts, Ronan in dark wool and a string tie, looking uncomfortable and handsome in equal measure. Mara stood before him with Grace in her arms, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. This was real, permanent. She was binding her life to Ronan's not out of desperation, but out of choice, out of love. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "We are gathered here to witness the union of Ronan Matthew Vale and Mara Elizabeth Whitlock in holy matrimony." The words washed over her, the familiar liturgy of vows and promises. Ronan's responses were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. When it was her turn to speak, Mara's voice shook only slightly. "I, Mara Elizabeth, take you, Ronan Matthew, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." "Do you have a ring?" the preacher asked. Ronan reached into his pocket and drew out a band of worked silver, etched with a pattern of mountains and sage. Mara's breath caught. It was beautiful, simple, perfect. "It was my mother's," Ronan said quietly. "Only thing I kept when I left home. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." He slipped it onto her finger, and the fit was so perfect it might have been made for her. Mara looked down at the ring, then up at Ronan's face, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The preacher smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Ronan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses and scars. He bent slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, then pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both chaste and full of promise. Mara's free hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm, and when they broke apart, the room erupted in cheers and applause. She was married. To Ronan. She was Mara Vale now, with a husband and a home and a future she'd never dared imagine. The celebration was simple. Whiskey passed around, someone producing a harmonica, rough voices raised in songs both bawdy and sweet. Grace was passed from hand to hand, blessed and kissed, and declared the prettiest baby in the territory. And through it all, Ronan stayed close to Mara's side, his hand finding hers, his shoulder brushing hers, his eyes saying everything his words couldn't. When the preacher left and the crew finally retreated to the bunkhouse, whooping and singing, Mara found herself alone with her husband in the quiet house. Grace slept peacefully in her cradle, exhausted by the excitement, and Ronan stood by the fire looking suddenly uncertain. "I'll sleep out here," he said, "give you privacy. This marriage, I know it's for protection, for legal reasons. I won't presume—" Mara crossed the room and took his hand, silencing him. "It started as protection, but that's not why I said yes." She looked up at him, letting him see everything she felt. "I love you, Ronan Vale. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you see me as something more than my mistakes. I love that you held my hand through the worst pain of my life and never flinched. I love that you look at my daughter like she's precious." Her voice broke. "I love you, and I want this marriage to be real. All of it." His arms came around her then, pulling her close, and she felt him shudder against her. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice," he said roughly. "I swear it." "I already don't regret it." Mara pulled back just enough to see his face. "Take me to bed, husband. Make me yours in truth." The kiss he gave her then was nothing like the chaste press of lips at the ceremony. It was heat and hunger and promises kept, and when he swept her into his arms and carried her to his room, their room now, Mara went willingly, joyfully into the future they'd chosen together. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over Stonevale Ranch, cold and clear and full of stars. And inside, two people who'd been cast out and broken found wholeness in each other's arms, building something new from the wreckage of their pasts. A family, a future, a love fierce enough to survive whatever came next. Morning came too soon, pale light filtering through the curtains of the room that now belonged to both of them. Mara woke to find Ronan already dressed, standing by the window with his shoulders tense as he watched the horizon. She sat up, pulling the quilt around herself, and he turned at the sound. "They'll come today," he said quietly. "Ashford won't wait long once he hears we married." The warmth of the night before evaporated like morning dew. Mara's hand went to the silver ring on her finger, twisting it nervously. "What do we do?" "We face them. Together." Ronan crossed to the bed and sat beside her, taking her hand. "I filed the marriage certificate with the territorial recorder last month, backdated it. Far as the law is concerned, we've been married since before Grace was born." Mara's eyes widened. "You planned this? A month ago?" "I planned for the possibility. Saw which way the wind was blowing, knew Ashford would eventually make his move." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Didn't know then that I'd actually want to marry you. That was just good sense catching up with what my heart already knew." She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solidity. "What about my former husband? If he really has a marriage certificate, then we prove it's worthless. You ran to Wyoming territory, filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment in a territorial court 2 months ago. I've got the papers." At her shocked look, he almost smiled. "Marcus has a cousin who's a clerk. We made sure everything was legal and binding. Your marriage to that bastard was dissolved before you and I ever said vows. You thought of everything." Wonder and relief flooded through her in equal measure. "I protect what's mine. And you've been mine since the day I offered you that job, even if it took us both a while to figure it out." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Get dressed. We'll feed Grace, have breakfast with the crew. When Ashford comes, we'll be ready." The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Mara tried to keep busy, feeding Grace, preparing meals, pretending her hands weren't shaking every time she heard hoofbeats in the distance. The crew was subdued, checking their rifles, positioning themselves around the property with the casual readiness of men who'd faced trouble before. It was just past noon when the riders appeared. More this time, at least 15 men, including the sheriff with his tin star glinting in the sun. And in the center of them, looking prosperous and smug, was a man Mara hadn't seen in almost a year. Her former husband, Daniel Whitlock. He'd grown softer in the months since she'd left. His face fuller, his clothes expensive. Money, then. He'd found money somewhere, enough to chase her across half the country for reasons that had nothing to do with love or fatherhood. Ronan stepped out onto the porch, and Mara moved to stand beside him, Grace in her arms. She felt the crew gather at their backs. a wall of loyal men ready to fight if needed. "Sheriff," Ronan said evenly, "this is private property. State your business." The sheriff was an older man, weathered and tired-looking. He dismounted slowly, his hand deliberately away from his gun. "Got a complaint, Vale. This man says you're harboring his wife and child, says she ran off with property belonging to him." "That man's a liar." Mara's voice cut through the air before Ronan could respond. "I was never his wife in any way that mattered. He threw me out when I told him I was pregnant, called me a whore, said the baby couldn't be his." Daniel's face darkened. "That's a damned lie. I've got the marriage certificate right here, legal and binding. You're my wife, and that baby is my daughter. I've come to take what's mine." "You have no claim on either of them." Ronan's voice was cold as winter steel. Mara filed for divorce in territorial court 2 months ago on grounds of abandonment. The marriage was legally dissolved. "And Grace is my daughter. I've got the adoption papers filed and witnessed." "You've got no legal standing here." The silence that followed was sharp with tension. Daniel's face went from red to purple, and Ashford, sitting his horse behind the sheriff, leaned forward with barely concealed eagerness. "That's convenient," Daniel sneered. "File for divorce just in time to marry your lover? And adopt a baby that's not even yours? Sheriff, this is fraud, clear as day. The only fraud here is you." Mara's voice shook with fury. "You abandoned us, threw me into the street with nothing. I have witnesses who saw it happen, who'll testify to exactly what kind of husband you were. Witnesses you've bought, no doubt." Daniel turned to the sheriff. "She's a prostitute, for heaven's sake. Everyone knows it. She spreads her legs for any man with coin, and now she's found herself a rich rancher to keep her comfortable. This is kidnapping, theft, fraud." Ronan moved so fast Mara barely saw it. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Daniel by the throat, lifting him half off his horse. "Say one more word about my wife," Ronan said softly, "and I'll kill you where you sit." "Ronan!" The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. "Let him go! Now!" For a long moment, Ronan didn't move. Then slowly he released Daniel, who fell back gasping and red-faced. But Ronan's eyes never left him, and the promise in them was clear. "Let me see the papers," the sheriff said wearily. "All of them. Marriage certificate, divorce decree, adoption papers. I need to see proof of what you're claiming." Ronan disappeared into the house and returned with a leather folder. He handed it over, and the sheriff studied the documents with careful attention. Minutes passed. Daniel fidgeted. Ashford's smile began to fade. Finally, the sheriff looked up. "These are all in order, legal and properly filed. The divorce was granted 6 weeks ago. The marriage between Ronan Vale and Mara Whitlock, now Vale, was formalized and recorded 4 weeks ago. The adoption of Grace Vale was witnessed and filed 3 weeks ago." He handed the folder back to Ronan. "Far as the law is concerned, you've got no claim here, Whitlock." "That's impossible!" Daniel's voice rose to a shout. "She's lying. They're all lying." "The territorial court doesn't lie," the sheriff's voice was firm. "And I've known Ronan Vale for 5 years. He's a hard man, but an honest one. If he says these papers are legitimate, they are." He turned to Ronan. "That said, there's still the matter of the complaints, about the moral character of your household." "What complaints?" Mara demanded. "That I work for my living? That I cook and clean and take care of my family? What exactly is immoral about that?" Ashford finally spoke up, his voice smooth and poisonous. "There's the matter of your previous profession, Mrs. Vale. The fact that you were known in St. Louis as a woman of loose virtue, that you sold yourself to men for money." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mara felt the blood drain from her face, felt shame and rage war inside her chest. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Marcus stepped forward before she could speak. "That's a lie," the old cowboy said clearly, "and I can prove it." Every head turned toward him. Marcus reached into his vest and pulled out a folded letter, worn at the creases from handling. "This here's a letter from the Mother Superior at the Sisters of Mercy Hospital in St. Louis. I wrote to her a month back asking about Mrs. Vale's time there. She wrote back, told me everything." He handed the letter to the sheriff, who unfolded it and began to read aloud. "Mara Whitlock served as a midwife and nurse in our hospital for 3 years. She was trained by our best practitioners, demonstrated exceptional skill in difficult births, and maintained the highest standards of moral conduct throughout her tenure. She left our employment only when her pregnancy made it impossible to continue the physical demands of the work. We would welcome her back without hesitation should she ever return to St. Louis. Signed, Mother Catherine Bernard, Sisters of Mercy Hospital. The words fell like hammer blows. Daniel's face went white, then red. Ashford's confident smile disappeared entirely. She was a midwife, the sheriff said slowly. A trained medical professional, not a prostitute. She was pregnant and unmarried, Ashford insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. That alone speaks to her character. That alone speaks to my character, Daniel snarled, apparently forgetting his strategy. I got her with child and threw her out. What of it? She was nothing but a servant, thought she could trap me into marriage by getting herself knocked up. So you admit you abandoned her. The sheriff's voice was flat. Admit you fathered the child and refused to take responsibility. Daniel seemed to realize his mistake too late. That's exactly what you said. The sheriff folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Marcus. Mr. Ashford, Mr. Whitlock, I suggest you leave now. You've got no legal claim here, and you've wasted enough of everyone's time with your lies and accusations. This isn't over, Ashford said, his voice tight with fury. We'll take this to the territorial governor if we have to. We'll expose Vale for what he is, a half-breed savage who's corrupted decent society. The change in Ronan was instant and terrifying. His hand went to his gun, and suddenly every member of the crew had their rifles up and aimed. The air crackled with violence, barely restrained. Get off my land, Ronan said, his voice deadly quiet. Right now, before I forget I'm trying to be a law-abiding citizen. The sheriff held up his hands. Everyone stand down, now. He turned to Ashford and Daniel. You heard the man. This matter is settled. The Vales are legally married, the child is legally adopted, and there's no grounds for further action. Let it go. The hell I will, Daniel spat. I'll go to every newspaper in the territory, tell them all about the whore and the savage and their bastard. The gunshot cracked like thunder. Everyone froze. Smoke curled from the barrel of Ronan's rifle, and 10 feet from Daniel's horse, the ground showed a fresh bullet hole. Next one goes through you, Ronan said conversationally. Sheriff, I've been patient, but this man just threatened my wife and child in front of witnesses. That gives me the right to defend my family. The sheriff nodded slowly. It does indeed. He turned to Daniel and Ashford, and his voice went hard. You need to leave. Now. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about the Vales, I'll arrest you both for slander and harassment. Am I clear? Ashford's face was mottled with rage, but he jerked his horse's head around. This isn't finished, Vale. You think you've won, but all you've done is make an enemy. I'll destroy you, your ranch, your reputation, everything. You can try. Ronan's voice was calm, but his eyes promised violence. But every time you come at me, I'll be ready, and eventually you're going to push too far, and I'm going to stop being civilized about it. They left then, Daniel and Ashford and most of their men, riding out in a cloud of dust and impotent fury. But the sheriff remained, watching them go, then turned back to Ronan. You made powerful enemies today, he said quietly. I made them the day I refused to sell my land. Today just brought it out in the open. The sheriff nodded. For what it's worth, those papers are solid. And that letter from the Mother Superior, that's not something Ashford can fight. But he's got money and influence, and he doesn't like losing. He glanced at Mara, his expression gentling. You've got yourself a good woman there, Vale. Don't let the bastards make you doubt that. Never crossed my mind to doubt it, Ronan said. After the sheriff left, the crew slowly lowered their rifles and began to disperse, the tension draining away. Mara stood on the porch with Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, seemingly unaware that her future had just been decided by paper and testimony and the threat of violence. Ronan climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of her, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. You all right? You got that letter, she said instead of answering. From Mother Catherine. You investigated my past. I needed to know the truth, needed proof when the time came. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. And I needed to know who you really were, beyond what the town said. You could have just asked me. Would you have told me? Really told me, with all the details and the pain behind them? His eyes searched hers. Or would you have given me the version you thought I wanted to hear? She was silent because he was right. She would have edited, softened, hidden the worst parts out of shame and fear. I'm sorry, she said softly, for not trusting you enough to tell you everything from the start. Don't apologize for protecting yourself. You'd been hurt too many times to trust easy. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. But I need you to trust me now. Ashford meant what he said. He's going to come at us again, and next time it won't be with lawyers and accusations. What will it be? I don't know, but we'll face it together. He straightened, his expression hardening into something determined. I'm going to file a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. Get everything on record. The threats, the harassment, all of it. If Ashford tries something, I want a paper trail showing his intent. Will that be enough? It'll have to be. Ronan glanced toward the horizon where the riders had disappeared. We've got right on our side now, Mara. Legal right, moral right. That matters even out here. But that night, as Mara lay beside her husband listening to Grace's soft breathing from the cradle, she couldn't shake the feeling that right wasn't going to be enough. Ashford had the look of a man who'd do anything to win, and Ronan had just humiliated him in front of half the territory. Men like that didn't forgive. They retaliated. The next 2 weeks were deceptively quiet. Supplies came regularly again, delivered by a different man who was polite and professional. No riders appeared on the horizon. No threats materialized. It was almost enough to make Mara believe the worst was over. Then Tommy came racing back from town one afternoon, his horse lathered and blowing, his face pale. "Boss, Mrs. Vale, you need to see this." He thrust a newspaper into Ronan's hands, the Territorial Gazette, printed in the capital. Ronan's face went hard as stone as he read, and when he handed it to Mara, her blood turned to ice. The headline screamed across the front page, "Savage and Sinner, the Corrupt Household of Stone Vale Ranch." The article that followed was poison dressed up as journalism. It detailed Ronan's heritage. His mother had been Shoshone, his father a fur trapper who'd never married her. It called him a half-breed who'd accumulated wealth through questionable means, implied he'd stolen the ranch through violence and intimidation. And it painted Mara as a prostitute who'd seduced him, who was raising her bastard child in an immoral household while corrupting innocent cowboys. Every word was carefully phrased to avoid outright libel, but the implications were devastating. And at the bottom, in smaller print, concerned citizens call for investigation into Vale operations. Ashford, Ronan said flatly. He owns a stake in that paper. They'll believe it. Mara's voice was hollow. People always believe the worst. The neighboring ranches, the businesses in town, they'll all turn against us. Some will, some won't. Marcus had come up behind them, reading over their shoulders. But enough will believe it to make trouble. He was right. Over the next few days, the effects rippled outward. 2 of the neighboring ranchers who'd been friendly before now refused to speak to Ronan when they crossed paths on the range. The general store in town suddenly couldn't fill their orders, always some excuse about being out of stock or waiting on shipments. And everywhere they went, people stared, whispered, turned away. The crew felt it too. Jack and Sam went to town for supplies and came back with split knuckles and black eyes, having gotten into a fight with men who called Mara a whore and Ronan a savage. Tommy reported that his sweetheart's father had forbidden her from seeing him anymore, said he wouldn't have his daughter associating with anyone from that corrupt establishment. Through it all, Ronan remained grimly focused on the work. He rode the property lines, checked the cattle, maintained the ranch with steady determination, but Mara could see the toll it took, the tight set of his shoulders, the way his hand drifted to his gun whenever riders approached, the sleepless nights when he paced the porch like a caged wolf. She tried to stay strong, to keep the household running, but the isolation wore on her. She'd been alone before, but this was different. This was being surrounded by people who'd decided she was something vile, who looked at her daughter and saw only shame. It was Marcus who found the notice nailed to their property gate, a legal document stamped and official, calling Ronan to appear before the Territorial Land Office to answer questions about his claim to the ranch. The date was set for 3 weeks hence, in the territorial capital. They're going to try to take the ranch through legal channels, Ronan said that evening, the notice spread on the table before them. Claim my ownership is fraudulent, that I don't have legitimate title. Do you? Mara asked, then added quickly, I'm not doubting you. I just need to know what we're facing. I bought this land legally, filed the claim properly, paid every fee and tax. Ronan's jaw was tight. But my father was white and my mother was Shoshone, and they were never married. Under territorial law, that makes me illegitimate. And illegitimate sons can't inherit property from their fathers. But you didn't inherit it. You bought it. With money my father left me when he died. Money Ashford's lawyers will argue I had no legal right to. He slammed his fist on the table, making Mara jump. They're going to use my blood against me. Use the fact that I'm half native to say I'm not entitled to own land like a white man. The injustice of it made Mara's blood boil. We'll fight it. We'll get lawyers. We'll present the title documents. We'll prove you have every right. You think lawyers matter when the judge already knows which way to rule? Ronan's voice was bitter. Ashford's got money and influence. He's probably already paid off half the land office. This hearing is just theater to make the theft look legal. Mara stood and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. Then we'll fight anyway. We'll make them work for it. We'll go to that hearing and we'll tell the truth, and if they rule against us, we'll appeal. We'll take it as far as we need to. And if we lose, if they take the ranch, then we start over somewhere else. Together. She pressed her forehead to his. I didn't marry you for the ranch, Ronan. I married you because I love you. Because you're the best man I've ever known. And whether we're here or somewhere else, as long as we're together, that's enough. His arms came around her, crushing her close, and she felt him shudder. I won't let them take this from us. I built this place with my own hands, turned it from nothing into something real. It's ours, and I'll be damned if I let Ashford steal it. Then we fight, Mara said fiercely. We fight with everything we have. The 3 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Ronan gathered every document he had, purchase agreements, title deeds, bank records showing the legitimate source of his money. Mara wrote to Mother Catherine in St. Louis, begging for a more detailed letter attesting to her character. Marcus reached out to neighboring ranchers who were still friendly, asking them to write statements supporting Ronan's claim. And through it all, Grace grew and thrived, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. She was smiling now, reaching for her parents' faces, making soft cooing sounds that melted Mara's heart. In the quiet moments, watching Ronan hold their daughter with such gentle reverence, Mara almost forgot they were fighting for their future. The day before they were set to leave for the capital, a rider appeared at the gate. Not Ashford's men this time, but a woman, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. She introduced herself as Margaret Hartwell, wife of the territorial governor. I read the article in the Gazette, she said without preamble, sitting in the kitchen while Mara made tea. And I've made some inquiries of my own, about you, about Mr. Vale, about the situation here. Mara's hands shook as she poured. And what did you find? That you've been grievously wronged, that the accusations against you are lies built on prejudice and greed. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes were kind but sharp. I also learned that you delivered my sister's baby 2 years ago in St. Louis, saved both their lives when the doctor had given up. The memory came flooding back. A difficult breech birth, a mother hemorrhaging, a baby that wouldn't breathe. Mara had worked through the night, refusing to let either of them die, and in the end they'd both survived. Mrs. Catherine Brennan, Mara said slowly, your sister. She speaks of you as a miracle worker. When I read what they were saying about you in that filthy paper, I knew it was lies. Mrs. Hartwell set down her teacup with a decisive click. My husband is sympathetic to your situation. He can't interfere with the land office hearing directly, but he can ensure it's conducted fairly, and he can make it very clear to certain parties that using the courts to settle personal grudges will not be tolerated in his territory. Hope, fragile and fierce, bloomed in Mara's chest. Why are you helping us? Because you saved my sister and my niece. Because I'm tired of watching bullies like Richard Ashford manipulate the law to serve their greed. And because, she smiled slightly, my husband's mother was Lakota. He understands what it means to be judged for your blood rather than your character. She left them with a letter for Ronan to present at the hearing, written on the governor's official letterhead, noting his personal interest in ensuring justice was served. It wasn't a guarantee of victory, but it was ammunition. Hope. That night, Mara and Ronan lay in bed with Grace between them, and for the first time in weeks, the future felt like something they might actually survive. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Ronan said quietly, his hand finding hers across their daughter's sleeping form, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the best of my life." "We're not losing," Mara said fiercely. "We're going to walk into that hearing, tell them the truth, and walk out with our home intact. And if we don't, then we'll build a new home, and another after that if we have to. But they don't get to break us, Ronan. We don't let them win." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes holding hers in the lamplight. "No, we don't let them win." And in the morning, they rode out toward the territorial capital with Marcus and Wyatt as their witnesses, carrying documents and letters and the unshakable certainty that they were fighting for something worth saving. Their family, their future, their home. The battle was just beginning, but they would face it together, and they would not surrender. The territorial capital rose from the plains like a promise of civilization, brick buildings instead of weathered wood, streets laid out in orderly grids, gas lamps waiting to be lit as evening approached. Mara held Grace close as their wagon rolled down the main street, aware of the stares they drew. A woman with a baby, flanked by hard-looking men who wore their guns like they knew how to use them. Not the usual sight in this carefully respectable town. They found rooms at a modest hotel, and Ronan paid extra to ensure they had a suite with a private sitting room where they could prepare. That evening, while Grace slept in a makeshift cradle and Marcus and Wyatt stood guard in the hallway, Mara and Ronan spread their documents across the table and reviewed everything one final time. "The hearing's at 10 tomorrow, Ronan said, his finger tracing the lines of the land deed. "Judge Preston will preside. He's known to be fair, but he's also practical. If Ashford's bought him, then the governor's letter will remind him that someone's watching." Mara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Hartwell said her husband would be there. That has to count for something. It counts for everything or nothing, depending on how deep Ashford's pockets go." Ronan sat back, rubbing his eyes wearily. "I'm sorry, Mara. Sorry I brought you into this mess that you and Grace have to face. Stop." She moved to him, kneeling beside his chair and taking his hands. "I chose this. I chose you. And I'd make the same choice 100 times over, no matter what comes tomorrow." She paused, then added fiercely, "Besides, I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting. I faced down a whole town's scorn and delivered my own baby with nothing but grit in your hands to help me. A legal hearing doesn't scare me." His expression softened, and he pulled her up into his lap, holding her close. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured against her hair. "You offered a desperate woman a job when no one else would." Mara leaned back to look at him. "And then you became the best man I've ever known. The luck was all mine." They sat like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, until Grace's fussing pulled them back to the present. Mara nursed her daughter while Ronan checked their documents one more time, and when they finally lay down to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Mara sent up a wordless prayer to whatever power might be listening that tomorrow would bring justice instead of ruin. The territorial courthouse was an imposing building of red brick and white columns, designed to intimidate. Mara walked up the steps with her chin high and Grace in her arms, Ronan solid and steady at her side. Marcus and Wyatt followed, and as they entered the main hall, Mara saw they weren't alone. A handful of neighboring ranchers had made the journey, men who'd known Ronan for years, who'd seen his work and his character. They nodded gravely as the veils passed, silent support in a sea of hostile faces, because the other side had brought an army. Richard Ashford sat at the front of the courtroom surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits, documents stacked high before them. Daniel Whitlock was there too, looking nervous and out of place, and scattered through the gallery were at least 24 townspeople from Fletcher's Crossing, clearly brought to provide witness testimony against Ronan's character. The judge entered, a gray-haired man with shrewd eyes, and everyone rose. But before he could call the hearing to order, a door at the back opened and Governor William Hartwell walked in, his wife on his arm. The room fell silent. Hartwell was a tall man with the weathered look of someone who'd built his fortune the hard way, and his presence sent a ripple of unease through Ashford's side of the room. "Governor," Judge Preston said with barely concealed surprise, "we are honored by your presence." I take a personal interest in matters of land rights and legal fairness, Judge Preston. Hartwell's voice carried easily through the room. Please proceed. I'm merely here as an observer. He took a seat in the front row, and Mara saw Ashford's confident expression falter just slightly. The game had changed. Judge Preston cleared his throat and opened the proceeding. We're here to examine the land claim of one Ronan Matthew Vale, owner of Stonevale Ranch, to determine if said claim is legitimate and legally sound. Mr. Ashford, as the petitioner challenging this claim, you may present your case. Ashford's lead lawyer stood, a slick-looking man with cold eyes. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mr. Vale's claim to the land in question is fraudulent on multiple grounds. First, that the money used to purchase said land was obtained through illegitimate means. Second, that Mr. Vale, being the illegitimate son of an unmarried union between a white man and a native woman, has no legal standing to own property under territorial law. And third, that Mr. Vale's household operates in violation of moral statutes, rendering him unfit to hold a land claim. He proceeded to lay out his case with methodical precision. Documents showing Ronan's parentage, his mother's name, her Shoshone heritage, the absence of a marriage certificate, testimony from Daniel Whitlock claiming Mara had stolen money from him and seduced Ronan to hide her crimes, sworn statements from townspeople calling the ranch a den of immorality, claiming Mara was a prostitute and Ronan a violent savage who'd intimidated neighbors into silence. It was all lies and half-truths twisted into something poisonous, but it was presented with such smooth professionalism that Mara felt her stomach knot with fear. This wasn't just a land grab, it was character assassination, designed to destroy Ronan so completely that no judge would dare rule in his favor. When the lawyer finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, Judge Preston turned to Ronan. Mr. Vale, you may respond. Ronan stood, and Mara was struck by how calm he looked. Not the hot-headed violence Ashford's lawyer had described, but steady and dignified. He carried himself like a man who had nothing to hide. Your Honor, every word they just said is designed to paint me as something I'm not. So let me tell you what I am. He met the judge's eyes squarely. I'm the son of Thomas Vale, a fur trapper who came to this territory 30 years ago, and Morning Star, a Shoshone woman who saved his life and became his wife in every way that mattered. They weren't married in a church because the nearest church was 300 miles away, and by the time they could have made the journey, I was already born. But my father loved my mother, and he loved me. When he died 5 years ago, he left me everything he had, money earned honestly through trade and trapping, documented in these bank records. He placed the documents on the table. I used that money to buy the land that became Stonevale Ranch. I filed the claim properly, paid every fee, met every requirement. Here's the original deed, here's the survey, here's the tax receipts for every year since. There's nothing fraudulent about my ownership. But the question of legitimacy, the lawyer started, is irrelevant, Ronan cut him off. I didn't inherit this land. I bought it. With money I earned working as a guide and translator, money my father left me from his legitimate business. The law says an illegitimate son can't inherit. Fine. I didn't inherit. I purchased. There's a difference. Judge Preston leaned forward, interested. That's a fair point. Continue, Mr. Vale. As for the accusations about my household, they're lies built on prejudice. My wife was never a prostitute. She's a trained midwife who worked at the Sisters of Mercy Hospital in St. Louis for 3 years. Here's a letter from the Mother Superior confirming it. She came to Fletcher's Crossing because the town sent out a call for a midwife, then rejected her when they saw she was pregnant. I offered her honest work for honest pay, and when we fell in love, I married her legally. Here's our marriage certificate, filed and recorded. Here's the adoption papers for Grace, witnessed by the circuit preacher and the territorial recorder. He laid each document down with quiet precision. That man, he pointed at Daniel Whitlock, is the one who got her pregnant and abandoned her. He admitted it in front of the sheriff. He has no claim on her or the baby. And Mr. Ashford, his voice went cold, is trying to steal my land because I refused to sell it to him at a fraction of its value. This whole proceeding is revenge dressed up as legal process. The lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, this is speculation and slander. It's the truth, a voice called from the gallery. Marcus stood, his weathered face resolute. "I've worked for Ronan Vale for 4 years. I've seen how he runs his ranch, how he treats his crew, how he's built something honest and good, and I've watched Richard Ashford try every trick he knows to force Ronan out. This hearing is just the latest attempt." "I'll corroborate that," another rancher stood. "Ashford's been buying up land all through the territory, forcing out anyone who won't sell. He tried it with me too. Only reason I'm still here is I threatened to shoot him if he set foot on my property again." A ripple of laughter went through the room, quickly suppressed. Judge Preston banged his gavel. "Order. This is a court of law, not a town meeting." But his eyes were thoughtful as he looked at Ashford, who'd gone red-faced with fury. "Your Honor," Mara stood, and every eye turned to her. "May I speak?" "This is irregular, but—" Preston glanced at the governor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Go ahead, Mrs. Vale." Mara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "My name is Mara Elizabeth Vale, formerly Whitlock. I'm a trained midwife, educated by the Sisters of Mercy. I've delivered over 100 babies and saved more lives than I can count. When I came to Fletcher's Crossing, I was desperate, pregnant, abandoned, with nowhere to go. The town rejected me because I didn't fit their idea of respectability, but Ronan Vale saw past that. He offered me work, a home, and eventually his heart." She looked at her husband, then back at the judge. "I'm not going to stand here and let these people destroy a good man because he dared to show mercy to someone society had cast out. Everything they've said about me, that I'm a prostitute, a thief, an immoral woman, it's lies. Here's proof." She handed over the letter from Mother Catherine, along with a second one that had arrived that morning. A detailed testimonial describing her years of service, specific cases she'd handled, letters of recommendation from doctors she'd worked with. It was comprehensive and damning to Ashford's case. The judge read both letters carefully, then looked up. "Mr. Whitlock, you testified that this woman stole money from you. Do you have proof of this theft?" Daniel squirmed in his seat. "Well, she had money when she left. It must have been mine. Do you have bank records showing a withdrawal? Witness testimony? Anything beyond your word?" "No, but—" "Then that accusation is without merit." Preston turned to Ashford's lawyer. "Your entire case seems to rest on character assassination rather than legal fact. Mr. Vale's land claim is properly documented. His marriage is legal. The adoption is legal. And the accusations against Mrs. Vale have been thoroughly refuted by credible witnesses. What exactly are you asking me to rule on here?" The lawyer looked rattled. "Your Honor, the question of Mr. Vale's legitimacy is irrelevant, as he correctly stated. He purchased the land, he didn't inherit it. Do you have any evidence that the purchase itself was fraudulent, that the money he used was obtained illegally?" "No, but the source of the money has been documented as coming from his father's legitimate trapping business. Do you have evidence to the contrary?" The lawyer shuffled his papers desperately. "Your Honor, surely the moral character of the household must be considered. I've seen considerable evidence that the household is run with more moral character than many I could name." Preston's voice was dry. "A trained medical professional, a legally married couple, a properly adopted child. Unless you can show me actual evidence of wrongdoing rather than prejudice dressed up as concern, I'm inclined to rule in favor of the defendant." "Your Honor, please." Ashford himself stood now, his composure cracking. "That land is vital to my business interests. I'm prepared to offer triple the original purchase price. This is a hearing about the legitimacy of Mr. Vale's claim, not an auction." Preston's eyes were cold. "And you've just made it clear that this entire proceeding is about your business interests rather than any genuine legal concern. I've heard enough." He banged his gavel once, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. "The land claim of Ronan Matthew Vale is hereby confirmed as legitimate and legally binding. The petitioner's challenge is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into whether this petition was filed in bad faith with intent to harass. Mr. Ashford, you and your lawyers will remain available to answer questions from the Territorial Marshal's office." The room erupted. Ashford was on his feet shouting protests, his lawyers scrambling to salvage something from the wreckage. Daniel Whitlock had already slipped out a side door, apparently having no stomach for the aftermath. and Governor Hartwell stood, making his way over to where Ronan and Mara stood frozen in shock. "Mr. Vale, Mrs. Vale." He shook their hands warmly. "Justice prevails today, and I want you to know that my office will be watching to ensure no further harassment comes your way. Mr. Ashford," he raised his voice slightly, "would do well to remember that I take a dim view of powerful men who abuse the legal system to bully their neighbors." Ashford's face went from red to white. He opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently recognizing that he'd lost more than just a land case. He'd lost the governor's favor, and in this territory, that was everything. Mara felt Ronan's arm come around her shoulders, pulling her close. Grace, who'd been remarkably quiet through the whole proceeding, chose that moment to let out an indignant wail, as if protesting the stress her parents had endured. The sound broke the tension, and laughter rippled through their supporters. "I think our daughter is ready to go home," Mara said, her voice shaking with relief and joy. "Then let's go home," Ronan replied. The journey back to Stonevale Ranch took 2 days, but they felt like a victory march. Word of the hearing's outcome had spread faster than they'd traveled, and at every stop, people who'd once turned away now offered congratulations, apologized for believing the lies, asked if Mara might consider taking on patients in the territory. She demurred politely, saying she had enough to manage with the ranch and her daughter. But she noted the names and faces. These were people who'd learned something about judgment and truth. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the ranch spread out below them, the stone house, the barn, the corrals where cattle grazed peacefully, Mara felt something in her chest break open. This was home, truly home. Not because of the land or the buildings, but because of what they represented, a future they'd fought for and won. The crew was waiting, having received word from Marcus who'd ridden ahead. They erupted in cheers as the wagon rolled into the yard, and Tommy practically yanked Ronan off the seat in his enthusiasm. "We knew you'd win, boss. Knew they couldn't take what's rightfully yours." "It was close," Ronan admitted. "Closer than I'd like. But we had right on our side, and that mattered." That night, they celebrated. The crew roasted a steer, broke out the whiskey they'd been saving, and made enough noise to carry across the valley. Neighbors who'd stayed loyal came to join them, and even a few who'd wavered showed up to apologize and offer their support. The party went on until well past midnight, until the stars were brilliant overhead and the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Mara sat on the porch with Grace asleep in her arms, watching Ronan move among his men with easy authority, accepting their congratulations and ribbing with equal grace. This was the man the world had tried to paint as a savage, as someone unfit to own property or raise a family. But she saw the truth. A man of deep integrity, fierce loyalty, and a capacity for love that had saved her when she'd had nowhere else to turn. He caught her watching and excused himself, coming to sit beside her on the porch steps. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of celebration and the night wind moving through the grass. "What are you thinking?" Ronan asked finally. "That I started this journey as someone who'd lost everything." Mara looked down at Grace, then up at her husband. "And I ended it with more than I ever dreamed possible. A family, a home, a future." She paused. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for staying when you could have run." He took her free hand, his thumb tracing the silver ring he'd placed there. "For fighting beside me instead of letting them break us apart. We're not that easy to break." Mara leaned against his shoulder, feeling his strength and warmth. And now everyone knows it. The months that followed the hearing brought changes beyond anything Mara had imagined. Ashford's investigation turned up evidence of fraud and bribery going back years, and he was forced to sell off his businesses and leave the territory in disgrace. Daniel Whitlock disappeared entirely, last seen boarding a train heading east, and the newspaper that had printed those vicious lies about the Vales printed a retraction and apology instead, though by then few people cared. The truth had already won. But the most profound changes happened quietly in the day-to-day life of Stonevale Ranch. Mara began taking on medical cases again, first just for the crew and neighbors, then for anyone who needed help. Women rode in from farms and homesteads all across the territory, seeking her skill with difficult births, her knowledge of healing herbs, her steady hands in crisis. She delivered babies and set bones and treated fevers, building a reputation that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with saved lives. Ronan expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land from a neighbor who was retiring, hiring more crew as the operation grew. But he also softened in ways that surprised even Marcus. He laughed more, smiled more, let down the walls he'd built to survive in a world that judged him for his heritage. And he was an extraordinary father to Grace, patient and gentle in ways that made Mara fall in love with him all over again every day. Grace herself grew into a bright, curious child who had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. She learned to walk holding Ronan's scarred hands, learned to ride before she could properly talk, grew up knowing she was loved beyond measure by parents who'd fought the world to keep her. 2 years after the hearing, Mara realized she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, no shame, only joy as she told Ronan they were going to have another child. He swept her into his arms and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately became absurdly overprotective, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup. Their son was born on a spring morning, arriving with his father's pale eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Ronan's father, and when Mara placed the tiny boy in Grace's arms and watched her daughter's face light up with wonder, she felt the circle complete. This was the family she'd been meant to have all along. Not the one society would have chosen for her, but the one her heart had chosen. Built from rejection and hardship, forged in the fires of adversity, and stronger for it. More children followed, another daughter, then twin boys who kept the household in cheerful chaos. The stone house expanded to accommodate them all, rooms added and laughter filling every corner. And through it all, Ronan and Mara stood together, partners in everything, their love deepening with each year that passed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Grace, now 12 and already showing signs of her mother's healing gift, teaching her younger siblings about the herbs in Mara's garden. Thomas, serious and thoughtful at 8, helping with the ranch work like a miniature version of his father. The younger ones tumbling and shouting with the pure joy of childhood. "Do you ever regret it?" Ronan asked quietly. "Staying here, tying yourself to a scarred half-breed rancher when you could have built a new life somewhere else?" Mara turned to look at him, this man who'd given her everything, and shook her head with absolute certainty. "Not for one single moment. You saved my life, Ronan. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. And you gave me this—" She gestured to the children, the ranch, the life they'd built together. "Every choice I made led me here, to you, and I'd make them all again." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The town finally named you an official territorial midwife. Put it in the official records and everything." "I saw." Mara smiled against his shoulder. "Same town that ran me out 10 years ago now wants to put my name in their history books. Funny how things change. You changed them. You proved them wrong just by being exactly who you are." "We proved them wrong," she corrected, "together." And that was the truth of it. Together they'd taken everything the world threw at them, prejudice, lies, legal battles, and the simple cruelty of small-minded people, and they'd won. Not just survived, but thrived. Built something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of their separate pasts. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Grace called out that dinner was ready, and the younger children came running, hungry and happy and loved. Mara and Ronan walked inside together, his arm around her shoulders, her hand at his waist, moving with the easy synchronization of two people who'd learned to walk through life as one. Behind them, Stonevale Ranch stretched across the valley, prosperous, peaceful, proof that sometimes the broken pieces of two lives could be fitted together into something whole and strong and beautiful. A home built not on what society permitted, but on what two hearts had dared to claim. And in the end, that made all the difference. 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 That made all the difference.